Thank you so much for joining us for our next pet parent webinar in the PetSure Paws Learn series. I'm Danny Houlihan, Chief Veterinary Officer at PetSure, and I'm your host and moderator for tonight's session. Tonight's webinar on nutrition for puppies and kittens is brought to you by PetSure and Hills Pet Nutrition. As a reminder, any advice is general only and is not considered your personal circumstances, so may not be right for you. Additionally, as this webinar is being recorded, the recording is only to be used for educational purposes and will be not reproduced for other purposes without prior permission from PetSure Australia. PetSure is a company of animal lovers, providing a sense of security to pet parents through pet insurance. PetSure powers the pet insurance propositions of many well-known brands, including Woolworths, RSPCA, Bow Wow Meow, Pet Insurance Australia, and many others. Additionally, PetSure has transformed the claim experience with the development of Gap Only. If you'd like to find out more about PetSure or Gap Only, please visit our website. Before we begin, I'd like to run through some housekeeping items. The webinar will run for approximately 45 minutes, followed by a question and answer session. On the screen, you should see a control panel to your right. If you experience any problems during the webinar, please submit your issue within the question panel and I'll try and resolve it for you. During the webinar, all phone lines will be muted to reduce background noise. If you have a question for the presenters, please post your question in the question panel. The speakers for tonight's webinar are Drs. Bryony Senic and Jessica Mills. Bryony graduated in 2007 from Murdoch University in Perth. She worked as a veterinarian in small animal practice, primarily treating dogs and cats for almost 7 years before moving to an industry role with Hills Pet Nutrition in 2015. She works as a professional development veterinarian for South Australia and Western Australia and is passionate about nutrition in pets. Jessica graduated as a veterinarian from the University of Sydney in 1999. She spent 10 years working in small and mixed animal practice in Australia and the UK before moving into an industry role in 2009. She enjoys utilising her veterinary skills in the field of nutrition as the professional consulting veterinarian for New South Wales and ACT for Hills Pet Nutrition. So without any further delay, I'd like to hand you over to Bryony and Jessica.
Thanks so much, Danny. And hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. So over the next 30 minutes, we're hoping to have a pretty informal discussion covering some of the common questions that you may have about feeding your puppy or kitten. As Danny said, please feel free to ask any questions via the chat function as we go along. And if we haven't addressed them during the session, we'll answer them at the end. I'll hand over to Bryony to start off with. To look at the first common question is, how do I know what to feed my puppy and kitten?
Thanks, Jess. Well, I guess there's three main factors affecting your puppy or kitten's health, and these are genetics, environment, and nutrition. And of these, nutrition is the only factor that you can fully control. So you really want to try and choose a good puppy or kitten food that is complete and balanced, and that means that it contains all of the vitamins, minerals, and nutrients that you need in the required amounts. So compared to adults, puppies and kittens have higher requirements for things like fat, protein, calories, and some minerals as well. So I'll hand back over to Jess for the next question.
And I guess the next thing we want to look at is, well, what should you do as a pet parent when you're looking for what diet to choose? And I guess there's a few things, and we're going to talk a little bit about what you can see on labels and how you can interpret those pet food bags. But we know how confusing it is. There's so many different pet foods available on the market. So one of the first things I recommend is that you find out a bit about your pet food brand, where it's produced, where it's manufactured. Is the brand the people who are actually manufacturing the diet as well? What quality controls do they have in place? Who's responsible for the formulations? Do they have a veterinary nutritionist on board? Because just as with ourselves, that we like to trust nutritionists, dietitians to tell us what's the best thing for us to eat, veterinary nutritionists are going to be the best place to work out what's the most appropriate for your puppy or your kitten. And is the company transparent with what's in their their diet, both ingredients but also the nutritional information. You can see some of that on the label, but you should be able to find more information either on the company's website or by giving them a call and having a chat to them. The next thing, I guess, is really looking at whether that diet is complete and balanced. And I'll pass over to Bryony. She's going to talk a little bit about labelling guidelines and how this fits in.
So AFCO, which you can see on the slide there, that's the Association of American Feed Control Officials. And it's a US agency that establishes guidelines for the labelling of pet foods and sets a standard for nutritional adequacy. So these guidelines are accepted in many countries around the world, including Australia. So it defines ingredients and terms, it standardises things like your feeding trials and establishes minimums and maximums for key nutrients and life stages. But AFCO doesn't regulate, test, approve or certify pet foods in any way. These functions are held by various state and national agencies depending on the market that you're in. So what I will get Jess to do is just go on to the next slide. So as Jess mentioned before, what you really want to try and do is choose a diet that says that it's complete and balanced. So instead of saying that's intended for supplemental or complementary feeding, it'll say that it is complete and balanced. So you can see on the slide there is an example of pet food A formulator. So it says it's formulated to meet nutritional levels established by the AFCO cat food nutrient profiles for all life stages. Now, when it says that it's for all life stages, that means that it has to meet the most demanding phase of life, which is your growth phase. So for puppies and kittens, this would be okay. But we know that puppies and kittens have slightly different nutritional needs in terms of proteins, calories and things like that than adults, for example. So this may not be an ideal choice for once they hit 12 months of age. You can see the second example there says animal feeding tests using AFCO procedures substantiate that pet food B dog formula provides complete and balanced nutrition for maintenance. So that would be a diet that is complete and balanced, and it's intended for maintenance, which would be your adult phase. If you're looking for a specific puppy or kitten diet, it might say provides complete and balanced nutrition for growth, or provides complete and balanced nutrition for puppy, or complete and balanced nutrition for maintenance. And that would be the one that you would be aiming to try and feed. We'll get Jess to hand over.
Thanks. And I guess, you know, it's really good for you guys to know where to look for some just general information and advice. And I'd recommend the WSAVA guidelines. So WSAVA is the World Small Animal Veterinary Association. They're a global community of vets that work together to advance the health and welfare of pets around the world. And they've got a subcommittee that's based around global nutrition. They provide a lot of information and guidelines both for vets but also pet owners. So if you have your phones, you can actually scan those QR codes and it will take you straight to their Savvy Pet Owner Guide to Nutrition. You know that this now comes from an unbiased source. It'll talk about how you can look at finding the best information when you're doing your own research on the internet, and it also provides some great links to reputable sources of information on the internet. So I highly recommend that you check those out.
So a really common question is, how is it possible to tell from the food packaging what you need to know about the quality of the diet? And I guess whilst the label will tell you some important information, we'll go on to the next slide. The ingredient list doesn't always tell the full story. So, for example, pets have a requirement for certain nutrients, and these nutrients can be provided by various types of ingredients, and it can be tempting to look at what's listed first when you're looking at that ingredient list. But it's important to remember that when you're looking at that ingredient list, it's always listed in order by weight, with the heaviest item first down to the lightest item. But with regard to poultry and poultry meal, for example, they're defined in the same way by AFCO, and that just means a clean combination of flesh and skin with or without bones, excluding the head, feet, feathers, and viscera. The difference, however, is that poultry meal is dehydrated. So the moisture content's been taken out of it, a bit like you can get some dehydrated camping foods. Whereas if you're using poultry or some breast meat, for example, then it's got a lot more moisture content in it and therefore is a lot heavier. So it's going to come further up in terms of the ingredient list. So it doesn't necessarily mean that one diet has more protein than the other, because one's a dehydrated form and one's got the water content in there, but it can be a bit misleading thinking that one's higher in protein or one is better quality than the other. One thing a label can tell you though is the consistency of the ingredients. So if the ingredients are listed as something called seasonal, or if there is the term and/or utilized, then the formula can actually change from bag to bag depending on the cost and availability of those ingredients. So this will commonly be read, for example, as beef and/or chicken and/or lamb. And so the issue with that is that the ingredients can actually change from batch to batch, as I said, depending on what's cheapest at the time and what's available. And so the nutrients can vary from bag to bag, even though you're still using the same brand of food. So you can't be 100% sure what you're purchasing, and that can make them a little bit more prone to things like upset tummies. And I'll get Jess to hand over now just to talk about some of the guidelines around the marketing stuff.
I think the other thing that you find on labels that can be quite confusing is there's lots of terminology on the label. And a lot of that is actually marketing claims, and it can be sometimes quite hard to distinguish between what's marketing language and what's a term that actually has a defined meaning by labeling guidelines. So, for example, something like natural is a very precise term. It's defined by the AFCO labeling guidelines, and it means that there's no chemically synthesized ingredient in the pet food as a whole. It can have some added vitamins, minerals, and trace nutrients, but nothing that's actually synthesized within there. As opposed to the term holistic, and the term holistic can have a lot of connotations, I guess, for you as a pet owner, but actually from a labeling point of view, there's no regulation around it. There's no label definition for it. So it actually means that when you see that on the label, that's a marketing term trying to entice you to buy a product, rather than a term that's actually telling you a lot about what's within that product. In reality, any diet that's complete and balanced could be termed as a holistic diet because it's providing everything you need. So let's take a look at what the advantages of feeding a more premium diet are, Bryony.
Yeah, so I guess some of the advantages of feeding a premium diet like Hills are things like the digestibility. So because it's really highly digestible, it means that more of those nutrients are going to be absorbed. And it also means that there's less mess to clean up in the backyard or in the litter tray. It's also got a consistent formula or a fixed formula. That means that the ingredients won't change from batch to batch, and it will provide a guaranteed analysis of the nutrients in the diet. It also has really stringent quality control. And also, as Jess said earlier, when you are investigating the types of foods that you might want to use, Hills is very transparent in terms of the nutrition of the diets. And we also have a Hills helpline available, so that if you do have any questions about any of the diets, that you as a pet owner can call us, you can contact us and ask any questions, and that's also available for veterinarians and veterinary nurses as well. And I'll now hand over to Jess just to talk a little bit more about Hills as a company.
Yeah, because I guess the thing is, as a pet owner, you may or may not have heard about Hills as a company. So I guess after this, we want to talk a little bit more about, you know, the common questions you might have in general with regards to feeding your puppy and kitten. But it might be interesting for you to know who it is that we are that's talking to you tonight and where do we come from. Hills as actually was started back in the 1930s by a veterinarian in the USA called Dr. Mark Morris. And it all started because he had a client who had a guide dog who had kidney disease. And he actually started at that point with developing the first nutritional diet. We've kept that going today. There's a lot of science behind what we do. For example, for puppies and kittens, we know that, for example, DHA is a really important essential fatty acid that's been shown by science to really help brain and vision development. And similarly, high levels of antioxidants is really important. It's been shown to help with immune function, which can help when your puppies and kittens are undergoing vaccinations and stuff to really boost their immune response. But they're not the only people who are important for us. We've got our pet partners. So we've got over 450 dogs and 450 cats at our Global Pet Nutrition Center in Topeka, Kansas. And these guys are really important to us. They're actually our taste partners. Their role in life is to taste our food and make sure it tastes delicious, really. And they get lots of love. You've got a picture here that's a huge area. They get lots of stimulation. The staff love to go and interact with these guys. They've got their own teams, they've got their own names. There's a vet clinic on site. So they really get a lot of love and attention, just as your own pet does. So that's passing on to quickly Bryony to tell you a little bit about our sustainability. And then we'll move on to a little bit more about some of the questions you may have.
So it's Hill's mission to transform the lives of pets everywhere, especially those in need. And we're really proud of our Food Shelter Love partnership. And that helps transform the lives of dogs and cats in shelter locations through a number of shelters across Australia. So to date, we've provided over 1 million kilos of pet food to dogs and cats in these shelters. And there's 49 shelter locations that we support. And we've helped over 60,000 pets find their forever homes. Another thing Hills is really passionate about is sustainability and the environment, and we really strive to reduce waste and be an energy efficient company. So 100% of our plants that produce our dry kibble are zero waste certified under the True Zero Waste program. And part of our sustainability and caring for our planet includes the responsible sourcing of ingredients. And to that end, we've been awarded multiple globally recognised certifications. I'll now hand over to Jess to talk about some more questions, such as how much should I be feeding my puppy and kitten?
Thanks, Bryony. So I guess that's really, this gets to the crux of what you guys really want to know and hopefully why you're logged in tonight. So how much should you be feeding your puppy or kitten? Obviously, that's going to depend on their body weight. So the feeding guide on the pack is a great place to start. Be aware it's only a guide. Obviously, this is based on the sort of average animal, and all our animals are individual and unique. So you may need to tweak that slightly up or down to suit their individual needs. One thing that you may notice when you look at feeding guides on packet is that actually as they grow, as they get older, they need less food relative to their body weight. So, you know, when they're in that 0 to 4 months time period and they're growing really rapidly, then they'll need relatively more food for their body weight. So a 2 kilo dog would need more at that age than it would if it was 2 kilos and it was a little bit older. So weigh your pet regularly, look at the feeding guide regularly, and see how, you know, it goes. Obviously, chat to your vets or nurses if you at your local veterinary clinic if you need a little bit of advice on that. And one thing I highly recommend is that you should weigh that pet food, ideally to measure it, or at least make sure that you measure it on the cup quite accurately. I think as they're growing, it can be quite hard and it's very easy to overfeed them. Once they become an adult and you know how much they need to eat, I actually even recommend cutting off that cup so that you can't overfill it. Oh, and one other thing with regards to the cup is to make sure you use a cup that's been provided by the manufacturer, because cups can really vary in size and shape. So our cup recommendation has been validated based on the cup size that we use. Bryony, how can they tell if they're feeding enough food?
Yeah, that's a really common question. So the best way is by looking at your puppy or kitten. So you can see on the screen there that there's a body fat index risk chart, and where you see that green area, that's an ideal body condition. So when you view your puppy from above, you want to have a nice, waistline present there, and when you view from the side, that there is an abdominal tuck present. So you want to be able to feel the ribs, but you don't want to be able to see them. And you really want to be doing regular assessment of your puppy's body condition and making adjustments to the feeding if required, depending on that body condition. And obviously don't hesitate to contact your veterinarian if you're concerned at all about your puppy's weight. You can see on that body fat risk chart that as those pets gain more and more weight, that they tend to lose that waistline and they lose that abdominal tuck. So we really want them within that sort of that 20% is like an ideal body fat for pets. So Jess, I'll hand over to you now. How often should I be feeding my puppy or kitten?
This very much depends on the age of your puppy or kitten. Younger pets tend to need to be fed more frequently because they've got a smaller stomach size. So under that 3 months of age, we usually recommend feeding about 4 times a day. From 3 to 6 months, usually 3 meals a day works quite well, and then cutting down to 2 meals a day between 6 and 12 months. After that, it's very much personal preference. I feel that twice a day feeding tends to work well for most people and fits into a natural routine for both dogs and cats. Cats, you can graze feed as well, so you can put out dry food and let them come and go to it as they please. It's important that you measure it so that you're not overfeeding them though. So just make sure if you're doing that, you measure out your daily quantity or your half daily quantity if you're doing it twice, and that you then don't top up if you find that that bowl's empty. All right, so back to Bryony. Feeding wet or dry food, is there something that's a preference?
Well, it is a little bit personal preference, but when kittens and puppies are very small, then I'd recommend feeding more of the wet food, as they can sometimes find the kibble a bit hard to chew when they're very little. Once they're over a few months of age, then we recommend feeding a combination of both wet and dry, just for a bit of variety. But you need to make sure that if you are feeding both wet and dry, that you make adjustments to the amount you're feeding. So when you're calculating that amount, you may need to reduce the amount down to incorporate both the wet and the dry. But it is a bit of personal preference as well as to what you want to feed. Obviously, make sure there's plenty of water on hand, especially for kittens, because we don't want them to become dehydrated or anything like that. So this is a really common question, which I'll hand over to Jess. Do I need to supplement with calcium?
It is a really common question, isn't it, Bryony? And I think it's one of those things that we know that puppies and kittens need good levels of calcium for growth. But the other thing I guess we know is that excess of vitamins, minerals, any nutrient within the diet can actually cause as much problems as a deficiency can. So if you're choosing a diet that's complete and balanced for growth, or for puppies or for kittens, then you are absolutely covered. They've already got the right amount of calcium and phosphorus and all the right balance of minerals in there to allow them to grow at their correct rate. If you start supplementing them on top of that, you can actually end up giving them too much. You can end up with an excess of calcium, and that can cause a problem, particularly in the larger breed dogs. We'll come back to larger breed dogs in a little while, 5 minutes or so, because they've got some specific nutrient requirements which are quite different, and they can be really prone to joint abnormalities and overnutrition in those early months can really be one of the things that can be a causative factor. So I wouldn't recommend supplementing at all. Bryony, what about other treats?
Yeah, look, we all love to spoil our pets, but we often overlook the calories in treats. So For example, giving an average size cat, 4 kilo cat, 14 grams of cheese is actually the equivalent of us as humans eating a hamburger and chips. So it is a lot of calories. And a 15 kilo dog giving 2 pieces of salami is actually the equivalent of 4 chocolate chip cookies. So it's considerable the amount of calories that are present in treats. So as a general rule, we don't want treats to make up any more than 5 to 10% of the diet. So a really good trick is to actually have your daily allowance measured out at the start of the day, and then just take some of that kibble or that wet food aside from that daily allowance and use that as your daily treats. I really like that kind of idea. Another really common thing is table scraps. So can you give table scraps? And I guess there's a risk of overconsumption of calories and things like that. And we really need to be careful with certain things, particularly things like bones. Cooked bones are a really big no-no. They can splinter and perforate the bowel, or the pet can become obstructed by them. So we really need to avoid them. And then I guess there's the risk of developing fussy eating as well if you're giving a lot of your table scraps to your pet. And then the other common question, I guess, coming around sort of treats is using cow's milk. You know, can I give cow's milk? And I guess once puppies and kittens have been weaned, they lose the ability to digest milk, and they can often become lactose intolerant. So I would recommend avoid giving them cow's milk, as it can lead to a bit of an upset tummy, like some diarrhea and things like that. So this leads into another really common question, which what foods are toxic? And I guess this is by no means an exhaustive list of foods, but onions and garlic are toxic to pets, as are grapes and raisins. Chocolate is also, you know, the darker the chocolate, the more dangerous it is. And something that you probably haven't heard of or maybe not aware of is xylitol. So that's an artificial sweetener that you might find in some baked goods. It's also present in certain chewing gums as well, and that can be really dangerous for our pets. So you want to make sure that you are avoiding all of those types of things.
Yeah, and I believe it's also in some types of peanut butter. I know we sometimes use peanut butter to help with giving medications and things. So make sure that if you're using that it's xylitol free. And then I guess another common question that we often get asked is, well, won't my puppy or kitten get bored of eating the same food every day? And I guess that's fairly natural when you think about it from a human perspective, because for us, variety is the spice of life. We like to try lots of different things and new things. However, for our pets, actually consistency is really key. We want to make sure they've got a complete and balanced diet, but if we swap things around a lot, they tend to be more prone to getting upset tummies, particularly if we don't transition them. So which means sort of switching them over slowly from one to another. So there are definitely points where we would recommend switching. So when they're going from puppy to adulthood, when they're going from adulthood to senior, or if they require a special diet for any reason. So your vet might recommend a special diet for an underlying condition. But other than that, absolutely fine to feed them the same thing. But that doesn't mean we still can't give them variety. So you can obviously feed them dry or wet, as we discussed, and we can give a mix. And you'll find that there's often different forms of wet food. So for example, we have ones that look much more like a stew formation. So it's got, you know, lots of sort of bits of vegetables and meat quite obviously within it. We've got things that are more like chunks and gravy, and we've also got loaf forms. We've also got different flavour varieties as well. So you can change up flavour, you can change up the form within the same diet range without causing any issues, still knowing you're getting the nutrition you want, the right nutrition that you've chosen for them, and still providing a complete and balanced diet without really sort of switching and swapping between brands and stuff where you're risking more upset tummies. The other thing that we find is that some people find that their pets seem to finish their food really quickly. And I guess if you think about it, when pets, particularly cats, in a more sort of in their ancestry, they had to work for their food. And so they get it very easy now where they just go down to a bowl and they get it. But that can lead them to kind of eat it. Then they look at you and go, well, that's gone. Where's the rest? What we can do is we can do different things to really try and help slow down that eating process for them. It can really help with mental stimulation as well as just providing food as nourishment. And so there are these things like puzzle feeders. You can see a couple here on the line. They exist for both dogs and cats, and they really have to work and use their brain to work out how to get the food to actually be able to enjoy their meal. They get a lot of enjoyment out of this. It helps stimulate them, particularly, as things get back to normal, we're leaving the house more, we're going out to work more. It makes them take a bit more time over their food. And yeah, it's a really nice way of actually helping nourish them physically, but also stimulate their brain. Bryony, what about changing their diet after they've been desexed?
Yeah, this is another really common question, Jess. And I guess there's no need to change to a different diet after desexing because they're still technically in that growth phase of life. We do know, however, that once dogs and cats have been desexed, that they do need a reduction in the amount of their food due to a variety of reasons. So we recommend reducing the amount that you're feeding by about 20% as a general rule. But the best way, again, of determining the ideal amount to be feeding is regular weighing of your pet. So making sure that they're staying a nice healthy weight, they're staying a nice healthy body condition, and make adjustments to the feeding adjustments as required.
We mentioned before about large breed puppies. So when we're talking about calcium, we mentioned that large breed puppies have different needs. So what we know about large and giant breed dogs, and when we talk about large breed puppies, what I'm actually talking about is any dog that when it's an adult is going to weigh 25 kilos or more at a healthy body weight. And we know that these guys are much more prone to developing bone and joint abnormalities, such as diseases such as hip dysplasia you may well have heard about. And that's one of the things that can predispose that. So that can be due to genetics and various other factors, but nutrition really does play a role in this. And what we find is if they're fed a standard puppy food, or they're fed a food that's high in energy and high in calcium, then essentially their bones grow quite quickly or grow fairly quickly and faster than their muscle mass can actually keep up with it, keep those joints nice and sturdy. So the key is really about reducing the overall level of energy and calcium. So we have diets that have got slightly less calcium, slightly less fat, still ample for energy for them to grow, ample for them to develop their bones, but it just controls their growth rate. They're still going to reach their same optimal size. It's just going to be at a much more slow controlled rather than their most rapid growth rate possible, which really allows things to develop in sync so they get much better healthy joint development that way.
So another really common thing is knowing when to transition your pet onto an adult food. And so for small breed dogs and medium breed dogs and for kittens, we recommend transitioning slowly onto an adult food at 12 months of age. However, for our large breed, and as Jess mentioned, these are types of dogs that are going to be over 25 kilos of adult size, and your giant breed dogs, they take a little bit longer to reach their full growth potential. And so we recommend transitioning them onto an adult food once they're 18 months of age. So just that little bit longer.
Awesome. So that kind of brings us to the end of our sort of presentation session, if you like. We'll open up for questions after this. But I thought it might be nice for you guys to just in summary get a few of our top tips. So my few top tips for feeding puppies and kittens is make sure you choose a complete and balanced diet that's aimed for them during growth. I would measure or weigh their food amount so that we know that we're feeding them the right amount, and really keeping an eye on their body condition so that we're not over or under feeding them. And because you're choosing complete and balanced diets, avoid things like cow's milk, avoid supplements. They're not needed, and they can potentially cause upsets. Cow's milk can cause upset bellies, and we said with supplements, we can end up moving that nutritional balance and providing them with more than they need. Bryony, your top tips?
Yeah, monitor their weight and their body condition, as we mentioned before, and make adjustments to the feeding if required. So as Jess mentioned, the feeding guide is just a guide. So that's based on the average, just the same as people. Metabolic rate does differ between, different pets. So adjust that amount if you're required. And then at 12 months of age, transition gradually onto an adult food. That's for kittens and small and medium breed dogs. 18 months of age for your large breed dogs.
Awesome, and with that, we'll open up for any questions that you guys might have.
Perfect. Thank you so much to Bryony and Jess. And so a few questions that have come through. So the first one is, my puppy doesn't seem interested in dry food, but loves wet food and cooked chicken. Can they just feed that and no dry food?
Do you want me to take that one, Bryony? You can add in anything that I may miss. Look, just wet food is fine. Wet food, if you're using a quality brand, then the nutrition of wet food is actually the same as dry food. So from our point of view, if you went Hills Wet, one of our puppy tin foods versus our puppy dry food, you're going to get the exact same quality nutrition. You often find you end up feeding a little bit more volume-wise because wet food's got more water, but there's no problems at all with that. With regards to the chicken, consider that chicken as a little bit of a treat. The occasional bit of cooked chicken or something is okay. You don't need to add that as a base of the diet because you're getting all the protein and things that you need within the wet food that you're feeding. So really, I would have that in that little 5 to 10% calorie intake as my treat sort of portion, and you can use your wet food as your base food, and there's no problems at all with that. One thing, I guess, proviso as they get bigger, and it depends how old your puppy is. Often when they're smaller, they're going to like wet food more, and he may get more used to dry food. He or she may get more used to dry food as they get older. But one thing you may find is that they're not working their teeth as hard. So, getting dental checkups. In fact, to get proper dental effect from food, you need to use specific dental diets, and that would be something as they get older. But if they're on a fully wet food diet, then I would definitely talk to your vet about things that you can do to help with dental health.
Yep, I would just echo the same as Jess, because you're not getting any sort of mechanical cleaning action on your teeth when you've just got a wet formulation, then it would be important to chat to your veterinarian about some home care options with dental care, because we do know that that is one of the biggest problems that dogs and cats face is dental disease as they get older. So that's something to, I guess, just be aware of with.
Perfect. Thanks, ladies. And another question as well. We've got a listener whose cat is on the Hills microbiome diet and they're having trouble finding that because it's out of stock. So they're wondering if there's another diet that they could use in the Hills range.
Yeah, I would have to check as to when we hopefully have some more stock of the microbiome diet. I guess within our prescription range, there's nothing quite the same. So it's probably best to speak to your local veterinarian about what they might recommend, because it depends on why they have popped you onto the microbiome diet. I think the stock should be in pretty soon. Have you heard, Jess, when exactly it's going to be available?
I haven't heard the exact date, but no, I would echo your sentiments. I think it should be back soon, but if you need it now, then chat to your vet. Some of our other diets within our intestinal range may well be suitable, but it does depend on what the underlying disease is that they're trying to manage with that, as to which they would recommend as the next best option.
Perfect, thanks ladies. And then next question is, we've got a listener who, go ahead.
I was going to say, sorry, Danny. The other option is to contact the Heels helpline as well. So yeah, contact your vet, and then you can also contact the Heels helpline as well with any questions about that.
Perfect, thank you. And then the next question is, we've got a listener who has a 3-year-old King Charles Cavalier, and he's been desexed. He's about 12 kilos, and they're trying to get him to lose some weight, but they're struggling, even though they're measuring the food. Any tips for this 3-year-old Cavalier?
Yeah, look, it depends. Sorry,
You go.
Did you want to go, Bryony, or I'll go first? You can jump in. My feeling, it really depends on what you're feeding at the moment. If you're feeding your standard diet and you're just trying to measure and cut down with your standard diet, you'll find that it's much harder to lose weight that way, because if you start cutting down the amount of your regular diet, you just end up with hungry animals. They're not getting the same level of calories. They're not getting anything to promote satiety. There's a number of specific weight loss diets that are available. Some are sort of just low calorie, higher fiber type diets. And then we also do produce a diet which really works on the pet's own metabolism. It really works to get the pet's metabolism working more like that of a lean pet, and really working for an optimal body weight. So again, chat to your vet and they can help you with that. And then, doing exactly the kind of things you're doing as far as measuring. And yeah, anything else you want to add, Bryony?
Yeah, I was going to say, we do know that the metabolism of obese pets really differs than that of a normal weight pet, and they can't metabolize fats and things like that quite as well as a normal weight pet can. So, sometimes when you just restrict the diet, the normal diet that you're feeding, the body can just hold on to those fat stores even more, and the metabolism slows even more. So sometimes choosing things that help to speed up the metabolism can be a really good option, but your vet will be the best one to chat about that. The other thing to consider is sort of calories in versus calories out. What's the energy expenditure as well? So what type of exercise are you doing with your pet? Are you doing regular walks? Are you swimming can be a good thing as well. Getting them to work for their food, as Jess mentioned earlier, the food puzzle toys, having multiple different areas around the house where you've got the feed, if they're constantly hungry and begging for food, doing smaller meals more frequently. There are all sorts of things that you can try and do to help with the weight loss.
Perfect, thank you. And then the next question that has come through is, this listener has a toy poodle cross Maltese that's 15 months old, and this dog's super energetic and gets lots of exercise every day, and they're wondering if they need to feed more to compensate for all of that activity.
So again, probably the best way is by having a look at that body condition score and making sure that those ribs aren't visible. We want them to be palpable. We want to have that nice abdominal tuck, and we want to have the waistline when viewed from above. If those ribs are really visible, or if they're in fact losing weight compared to the last time you've had them checked, then yes, absolutely increase the amount that you are feeding of the diet. But again, as I said, those feeding guidelines are just a guide. So the best way is by looking at that dog, the body condition itself, and making adjustments as needed.
Yep, I do. I concur with everything there. I don't think I've got anything much more I can add to that. That's yeah, absolutely. Looking at them and weighing them regularly to make sure they're not losing weight.
Awesome. And then we've got a very fussy pooch. So this pooch becomes disinterested in food easily. So this pet owner is rotating through various different dry foods, which sometimes causes a tummy upset because of the amount of rotating foods. Any suggestions on how we get pets to eat the same diet consistently?
Yeah, that's a really common one. And Unfortunately, what is happening at the moment is dogs and puppies and kittens can be very good at training us. So they basically have learned that if I turn my nose up at this, I'll get something different. And actually, sometimes what we need to do to break that habit is actually just persevere a little bit. So put down the food. Often I say put it down for a short period of time rather than leaving it out. Make it a valued resource, if you like. So if you don't eat it in 10, 15 minutes, I'm going to take it away. And then when it gets to the next meal time, or if he hasn't eaten a lot, in an hour or two's time, put the food down again. So the puppy starts to realize that that's the food I'm going to get. This is what it is that it's going to be. And, then they can actually, they tend to get more used to it and stop turning their nose up as much. You can use sometimes things like low salt stock as a flavor enhancer. And that can also, if you pour a little bit over that, it warms the food, it releases the aromas. That can sometimes help as well. But I think sometimes, just being a little consistent can really help them just realize that that's the food that they're getting.
Yeah, I would just echo the slight warming of the food. So I think many people aren't aware that pets actually rely on their sense of smell for their sense of taste. So a lot of their taste comes through their sense of smell. And I'm sure if you've had a cold before, you've realized that, food doesn't taste the same. It doesn't taste as good. So sometimes heating the food up a little bit helps to release those aromas, and that can help with the taste and the palatability of diets as well. So that's another little trick that you can try.
Perfect. Thank you so much, ladies, and thank you everyone for those questions. Thanks all again for attending the webinar. We hope you've enjoyed the session. A very special thanks to Bryony and Jess for pulling together today's presentation and for giving up their time to share their knowledge and experience with us. Please remember to register for the next Pause and Learn webinar on Pets as a Form of Therapy on October 14th with Nadine Hamilton. If you'd like to learn more about Gap Only, PetSure, or the Pause and Learn webinar series, please follow us on social or visit our website. Good evening, everyone.
Danny.